All right, before we get into solving equations that have variables on both sides, we're just going to take a minute to just check what we've done so far with multi-step equations and this word problem here before we get going on that. So take a moment here, pause the video, try these 5 on your own. Once you've tried them, continue the video again and just check them to make sure you've got them right. So go ahead and do that right now. All right, so we'll go ahead and check your answers here on that word problem, just to explain how it's set up here. The 55H represents the distance that they drove 55 miles per hour. So if I took 55 times the number of hours that I drove 55 miles per hour, that would give me that distance. The 60 times, in parentheses, the 7 minus h, represents the distance that they drove at 60 miles per hour. So since they drove for a total of 7 hours, I need to do the 7 minus h. The h is how many hours they drove at 55. So when I do 7 minus h, that'll tell me how many hours I drove 60 miles per hour. And again, that total distance has to equal 405. So that's how we set it up. And again, once you got it set it up, well, once you have it set up, you just use distributive property there, combine like terms, and solve it. And we come up with 3 hours at 55 miles per hour, which means they drove 4 hours at 60 miles per hour. If you plug that back in, you'll see that that works out. All right, so moving on. We're going to look at solving equations with variables on both sides today. And you're going to learn a word here. It's called identity. And you'll see that it makes sense when we use it. Okay, so this first example, what's different here from before is that we have a negative 8x and we have a 4x. We've had that before, but what we haven't had is where they're on different sides of the equal sign. They've always been on the same side of the equal sign so far. When they were on the same side of the equal sign, we could always just combine them with what was there and simplify it. Well, when they're on different sides of the equal sign, what you want to do is you need to do the opposite to one of them to move it over to the other side with the other one. So in this example, they chose to add the 8x on the left side to move it over to the right side. So when they added the 8x, okay, right here, the negative 8x plus 8x, that took care of the x's on that side. And then we have the 4x and 8x over here. That made the 12x. So now we just have an x on one side, and you can go ahead and solve that. So taking a look at our example here, we've got 15 plus 4a equals 9a minus 5. Okay, and one clue I'm going to give you, or one hint here, is I either have to move the 4a or I have to move the 9a. The hint is move the smaller one. Okay, 4a is smaller than 9a, so I am going to choose to subtract the 4a on both sides here. The reason I always move the smaller one is to avoid having a negative. Okay, and if we go back to this example that was done for us, you know, they had to choose between negative 8x and positive 4x. So remember, negative 8 is smaller than positive 4. So that's why they moved, added the 8x to get rid of the negative 8x, because that was the smaller one. Okay? Now, it will work if you don't do that. It's just that when you do it this way, when you move the smaller one, then you avoid the negative. Okay? It'll still work out the other way. You'll just have to deal with the negative. Okay, so now we have 9a minus 4a over here, which is 5a. And then they're adding the 5 to each side. So when you do that, you end up with 20 equals 5a. And to solve this, you're just going to divide both sides by 5, and you'll get your 4 for a solution. So the solution is 4. Okay, if you check that and put the 4 in there, 4 times 4 on this side is 16. 9 times 4 is 36. 15 plus 16 is 31. 36 minus 5 is 31. And it works. Again, we substituted the 4 there. Okay, moving on here, we have one that has some grouping symbols. We've got parentheses. Remember, you can use distributive property with fractions. You can also just multiply by the reciprocal. Remember, you'd have to do that on both sides. Okay, either way it's going to work out. But the main thing here is you got to get rid of those parentheses first. If you have parentheses, get rid of them. All right, on this one here, again, we have parentheses, so the first thing we want to do is get rid of the parentheses. So I'm going to distribute that 6. 6 times t is 6t. 6 times 3 is 18. Okay? Now I've got a 4t on the left, I've got a 6t on the right. Again, move the smaller one. 4t is smaller, so I'm going to subtract the 4t from both sides. Okay, when I do that, I'm left with the negative 12 on the left. 6t minus 4t is 2t, and we still have the plus 18. Now it's just a two-step equation to solve. You're going to subtract the 18, not negative 18, sorry. You're going to subtract 18 from both sides. On the right, that's just going to leave you with the 2t. On the left, negative 12 minus 18 is negative 30. And then you would just divide by the 2 and get negative 15 for t. Okay? And there's that. Okay, here's a couple problems. I'd like you to try them on your own first, and then go ahead and check them. So pause the video right now and take some time to try these on your own. All right, so go ahead and check these. You notice on the first one, I chose to subtract the 3b. Again, you had 3b and 8b. 3b is the smaller one. Move the smaller one. Once you do that, you just make it a two-step problem. 7 equals 5b plus 2. Subtract the 2, divide by 5. Over on number 2, okay, with the fraction there, sometimes it's easier to just distribute the fraction. In this case, this one, it works out nice to just distribute the fraction instead of multiply by the reciprocal. Because 3/4 times 4, well, your 4's just cancel each other out. You're left with 3d. And 3/4 times 8, well, if you do 3 times 8, that's 24. 24 divided by 4 is 6. So in this case, it just works out nice to distribute the fraction. Again, that's not always the case. You could multiply by the reciprocal as well. That would work out. Just remember, you'd have to multiply both sides by the reciprocal. Okay, now moving on here, here's where the identity comes in. Okay, so when you have an equation that is true for all values of the variable, that is called an identity. Okay, and if you think about like when somebody steals your identity or you keep your identity, it stays the same. Okay, it's the same thing. That's what identity means. So here you have a couple of examples. If you look at A, after they did the distributive property, they came up with 3x equals 3x plus 12. Well, when you subtract the 12, or I'm sorry, when you subtract the 3x, you end up with 0 equals 12. Okay, so they subtracted the 3x and got 0 equals 12. Well, that is not true. So there's no solution here for this. When you get a false statement like that, it means no solution. Now in letter B, you'll notice that they came up, after they did the distributive property, you got 2x plus 10 equals 2x plus 10. It's the same on both sides. So that's a true statement. That one's an identity. It doesn't matter what number we put in there for x, it's going to be true. Okay? So now taking a look at a couple examples we have here. Okay, the first thing I need to do is the distributive property. Okay, 4 times x is 4x. 4 times 5 is 20. Okay? So now, what I have here is 4x plus 5 equals 4x plus 20. Well, that's not true. The reason it's not true is because if you take 4x on both sides, okay, I can't take 4x plus 5 and then take 4x plus 20 and expect to get the same thing. Okay? So 4x cannot be equal to 5 more than itself and 20 more than itself. So there's no solution here. Okay, and the letter B, after you distribute here, 3 times 2x is 6x, 3 times negative 1 is negative 3. So we get 6x minus 3 equals 6x minus 3. Well, that's a true statement. They're exactly the same on both sides. So that's going to be true for all values of x. So then it's called an identity. Okay, so if we look at the two that we have here, we've got a fraction. Okay? And we can choose to distribute this fraction, or we can multiply by the reciprocal. Either way here is going to work out pretty good. I'm going to just choose to distribute it because a half times 4t is just going to be 2t, and half of negative 6 is just negative 3. So a half is an easy fraction to multiply by. So I have 2t minus 3 equals 2t. So I've got a 2t on the left, a 2t on the right. I need to subtract one of them. It doesn't matter because they're the same. And what I end up with here is negative 3 equals 0, which is a false statement. Again, when it's false, we say no solution. Moving on to the next one, number 4 here, I've got parentheses on the right side, so I need to distribute to get rid of those. First thing I need to do, so I'm going to have 10m minus 4 equals negative 4 plus 10m. Okay, now you should notice right now that I have a positive 10m on the left and a positive 10m on the right, a negative 4 on the left and a negative 4 on the right. So these are actually the same thing. So you should be able to tell right now that this is an identity. But if you carry it out, I'm going to subtract the 10m on both sides. Well, when I do that, I end up with negative 4 equals negative 4, because 10m minus 10m is 0 on both sides. So there I get a true statement. So this is an identity. Okay, last thing here. We've got some steps here for solving these equations. Okay, we've gone through quite a few now, and there's just some general rules you can follow here to solve these. So if you'd like to pause the video a minute here to copy them down, go on the next slide, you'll see where it is to fill it in. So pause the video here for a moment and fill in the blanks. All right, so we'll go ahead and check your notes here that you filled the right things in. Once you've got everything done here, show your note sheet to a staff member in the room so that you can get your homework sheet, and go ahead and complete that worksheet. Have a good day.